The talk for Daiana is Becoming Local, Tracing the Huancas, Mitmacuna, Potting Tradition in Amazonas, Peru. So, thanks, Daiana.
Oh, right. Yes, that would be helpful. Bueno, muy buenos días con todos. Mi nombre es Daiana Rivas Tello y soy candidato de doctorado en la Universidad de Brown y también arqueóloga. Hoy día, bueno, primeramente quiero agradecer a los organizadores de este evento. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación a poder compartir con todos ustedes hoy en día. Y también felicitaciones porque aunque nos falta un día completo, ya creo que el evento ha sido un exitoso. Entonces ya está bien. Pero muchísimas gracias. Y hoy día voy a poder tener, no sé, el privilegio de presentarles mi trabajo de campo para mi tesis. Regresé en agosto, entonces es fresh out of the press, muy nuevo. Y entonces estoy muy emocionada de poder compartirles con ustedes, un grupo que les interesa temas que también me interesa a mí. Y por favor, en cualquier sugestión o recomendación, cualquier tip sería muy appreciated. Pero la charla va a ser en inglés. Entonces, si tienen preguntas, por favor, me avisan y les puedo clarificar cualquier término o cualquier cosa que no se esté claro en inglés o castellano. Gracias. This one. Wait, oh, wait, where's the pointer? I'm sorry. So in 2012, the Peruvian Ministry of Culture designated pottery from the town of Huancas in Amazonas, Peru, in the provincia de Chachapoyas, as cultural patrimony, illustrating only the most recent event in a long series of interactions between Huanca potters and external political institutions. According to both written and oral histories, the population that now forms the community of Huancas were forcibly resettled as a mitmacuña, or migrants under the Micmac Inca policy. These migrants are moved from their homelands, original homelands in the Mantaro Valley, the south central part, located in the south central Peruvian highlands. They were relocated from this region to the northern Amazonian region in circa 1470. Despite having to leave their ancestral homelands and experiencing centuries of imperialism, beginning with the Inca, Spanish colonialism, Peruvian national rule, and most recently with the growth of tourism to the region, the Huancas potters have been able to maintain their production of earthenware pottery for over 550 years. Based on archaeological fieldwork, archival work, oral histories, and in collaboration with Huanca potters, I traced the history of this crafting tradition from the late Horizon, the Spanish colonial period, and into the present. So more generally, my project asks, how have crafting communities adapted to shifting political regimes and colonialism? What role does material and crafting play in maintaining community identity? So as Olivier Gosselin explains, every step of the technical process in pottery production, from the selection of clay to firing to finishing, decorating, is a moment of symbolic discourse. Work by Bill Siller, conducted in the Andes, also illustrates that the act of pot making is social, as individuals become potters through the performance of this act, which takes place in specific landscapes and in specific social structures. For the purposes of this talk, and in theme with our conference, I would also like to examine an additional question today, the notion of how we as archaeologists understand the local. So what is local production, who is local, and how can we perhaps interrogate that or complicate that a little bit with this case study as well. So in her 2013 paper, Isabel Druck revisits the question, what is local? Specifically in ceramic analysis. She invites the reader to consider expanding the concept of local beyond proximity, beyond space and physicality, and instead lean into the complexities of ceramic production we see all throughout the world, and specifically where she's referring to the Andes. Gabriel Ramon Jofre also complicates how archaeologists conceptualize local pottery production by presenting ethnographic case studies of swallow potters, potters who leave their home, migrate to other communities, and then produce pottery in that space, despite not being from there, but producing locally while living there. So in both of these articles, Druk and Ramon Jofre mentioned that Micmacuña is one of the examples that also blurs this line between what is local and non-local production. Druk writes, becoming local is another process of affecting the interpretation of ceramic data in archaeology. This phenomenon is rarely documented and deserves more attention. And, oh, sorry, I just noticed that. But yeah, I feel very lucky to be working in this particular, with this particular community and in these particular contexts because I'm able to really explore exactly what Ramon Jofre and Druk are mentioning, that the Macuña is something that we really could learn from in terms of our interpretation of the local. Oops. So in today's talk, I'll be tracing, very briefly, the history of the community of Huancas, beginning with the late Horizon period and the Inca presence, providing a little bit of context of what the Micmacuña system is for those of us who may not be familiar with it, and then also exploring that transition into the early Spanish colonialism, again, another moment in time when we have a relocation under the Toledo reforms, which I'll elaborate a little bit, and into the present with contemporary policies. I will provide a summary of the work that our project has been able to do, titled AHEAD. So AHEAD standing for the Arqueología de Huancas y Estudios de Alfarería Doméstica, that we were able to conduct a season, well, 2 seasons, one archaeological dig and then one laboratory work in this, we just wrapped up this past year. Given the nature of this project and this particular history, and the fact that it moves from the late Horizon up until the present, it meant that we're fortunate enough to not only have access to archaeological materials, but also archival records and oral histories. Thus, we were able to develop an interdisciplinary project that applies methods best suited for the time period that we were looking at, whether that be ceramic analysis or ethnographic methods. Another benefit of this project is that we don't have to segment a continuous history. When we as archaeologists or other researchers do this division between the history in the Americas from pre-Hispanic, prehistoric to historic or Hispanic, we risk, one, losing these really key moments in time that reveal so much for us of how people adapt, but also we risk perpetuating the idea of people being untouched by modernity or possibly at risk of losing a tradition due to acculturation. Instead, we examine these particular moments of transition and turbulent times to learn how people make strategic decisions of when to maintain or adapt a practice, depending on the situation and when an opportunity arises to manipulate a colonial system. As I will demonstrate, hopefully, by the end of this talk, Huanca potters have overall been able to maintain a tradition while also making small, subtle changes along the way. So it's neither maintaining completely or changing completely, it's somewhere in between. So just to provide a bit of context of where in the world we are, the contemporary community of Huancas is located within the mountainous region of Amazonas, Peru, in the Chachapoyas province. It is located approximately around 10 kilometers outside of the provincial capital of Chachapoyas, the city of Chachapoyas. This region has a rich archaeological history. It is home to thousands of hilltop sites, cliff tombs, architectural terraces, and prior to the Inca arrival, multiple ethnic groups occupied the region from about 900 AD up until, let's say, 1470, inhabiting hilltop sites and mediating between lowlands and the highlands. It's the Ceja Selva, so a lot's happening, but not enough research has been done, so we're kind of still figuring out what exactly was happening. And one of the common narratives that we see in chronicles about the region is that the Chachapoyas heavily resisted Inca conquest. Oh, sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. You guys can read some of it? Okay. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Inca embarked on a rapidly territorial expansion campaigns, and in around circa 1470, the Inca Empire incorporated the Chachapoyas region to their empire. This was under Tupac Inca Yupanqui, who is thought to be the first to have conquered Chachapoyas because, again, there was a lot of resistance, so Chachapoyas had to be conquered or incorporated multiple times. According to chronicles, the Chachapoyas, again, a label given by chronicles to describe multiple ethnic groups, which is still now being explored as to whether or not it's an appropriate term to refer to the people at large. It would be equivalent to saying indigenous people as opposed to each particular tribe. So according to the chronicles, the Chachapoyas were difficult to conquer and refused to lose their independence. By the time the Inca incorporated Chachapoyas, the Mi'kmaq policy had already been in place, a policy where entire communities were forcibly relocated into different regions for the purpose of state control and production. These special forces were moved thousands of kilometers away from their original homelands and worked in new landscapes and or formed new production centers. These Mi'kmaq were also resettled to secure rebellious areas and perhaps also secure desired land. So although the Mi'kmaq were only intended to be resettled temporarily and expected to return to their homes as paying tribute subjects, in practice, the Mi'kmaq were separated from their homelands for generations, and at times they never returned, which is the case here at Huancas. Overall, it is estimated that several million people were resettled because of these campaigns, and although the Mi'kmaq were given some settlement privileges, they were expected to live only within their community and could only assimilate with they could only interact with themselves and not assimilate with the local population. So a lot of, this was, the intention was to maintain them as a distinct group of people and distinct cultures, so yeah. Again, I think that in this case with the Mi'kmaq and the Inca, it's a moment where we see Inca policies purposely being placed to prevent revolts and rebellion, and it is a strategy of maintaining people in line that we will soon enough see with the Spanish. So here we have a quote, I have it written here in Spanish, but I'll read it to you in English, that describes this oral history of the Mi'kmaq coming from a different place. Señora Elvira writes, or says, history tells us that we inherited and are descendants of the Huanca culture, according to our grandparents. They told us that the Huancas were Mitimais or Mi'kmaq. I think that these words are Quechua, but I don't know what they mean. However, according to history, we come from the Valle de Mantaro. That is how we know where our ancestors came from, and that is why I am proud to call myself a Huanquina alfarera, or potter. History also tells us that they were the first town of Huancas wasn't found here, she's referring to the contemporary town, that it was found outside of the airport in a place called Chundur, where we couldn't find the necessary raw materials to make pottery. There was no greda, clay, there was no piedra, rocks, there was no arena, sand. The three most important ingredients or materials needed to make our pots and how we identify ourselves as Huanquina potters. So in this quote, we see that there is very much a historical memory that is being told and maintained by the community of the Huancas as a Mi'kmaq moving from the central part of, south central part of the Andes. And according to other historical chronicles that looks into the Huancas from the Mantaro Valley, they also were described as a rebellious community. And so a working theory here is that perhaps as Chachapoyas was rebellious, Huancas from the southern part of the country was also rebellious. You have them move portions of their population in order to get these people under control. And I think that in a way we also have to consider how the presence of these full-time labor forces meant that both the local community and the Mi'kmaq were under constant surveillance by each other. Nobody knew who was pro-Inca and who wasn't because they weren't necessarily interacting all the time. So it was a way of policing people. And then here we have the journey that they took, which was quite far. Okay. So in 1570s, Spanish Viceroy Francisco de Toledo implemented his policy of reducciones, forcibly, again, consolidating dispersed indigenous populations into planned settlements, and with the idea to transform people into ideal subjects. During this period, we also see, oh, that's right, the construction. So this is probably maybe if you ever visit Latin America, I'm sure you've come across this outline everywhere. But the Central Plaza with the church, administrative buildings, maybe flanking the plaza, and the structures, the setup of this grid with the Central Plaza and the church meant that people could really be observed. So who was attending church? Who was going to the municipalidad? And that was, and also having, I think, time controlled and organized in this way really was a disruption to previous ways of living in the Americas, not just in the Andes. Let's see. So during the early colonial Spanish period, debates also arose as to how to manage the Micmacuña groups in light of the Toledan reforms. Although some Micmacuña maintained connections to the distant homelands, and I'll briefly explain that in an example, only some returned to the original homelands, and some stayed in these new settlements. In this document here, it's really curious because it's actually a legal dispute between someone from Huancas who is claiming to have inherited land in the Mantaro Valley in about 1598. So it's just illustrating that even after being, experiencing Spanish colonialism, that tie, it's under 100 years probably, they were still maintaining that connection. They still recognize as that being their original homeland. And it's curious also as to why they didn't return or how they couldn't go back to their homelands, but they did end up staying in what we recognize now as the Pueblo de Huancas. So returning to the declaration of Huancas potting as a tradition under cultural patrimony of the state, the current celebration of traditional heritage by the Peruvian state not only promotes tourism, in other words, neoliberal reforms, but also simultaneously recognizes cultural differences while forming a unified state, a process which Charles Hale refers to as neoliberal multiculturalism. Though these policies may seem to benefit communities, and at times they romanticize the past, it could result in the contemporary state deviating from addressing structural problems faced by marginalized groups. While these neoliberal multicultural models continue to dominate in the Andes, specifically we see it in Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, people in the region have learned to strategically or work within these systems, these models. So I think that something I find really curious here is that the Huancas, the contemporary Huancas, are being celebrated not just for their pottery production, but what the lure to their particular history is the fact that they were a Micmacuña. It's common knowledge in the region. Everybody knows that they're not from Amazonas, that they're originally from someplace else, but yet they're being heavily promoted for purposes of tourism in Amazonas. In fact, at times, it's one of the most visited places when you go to Chachapoyas. And I think it really kind of gets us thinking a bit as to how we can begin to conceptualize local. Huancas is simultaneously not from Amazonas, but now it is one of the faces promoting tourism to Amazonas. When there are artisan fairs, like large national artisan fairs in Lima, they are representing Amazonas. So it's this, contradiction, I guess, but something very funny happening. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to shift now a little bit to just describing a brief summary of what the archaeological work we were able to do this past year, and work that we were fortunate enough to do in consultation with the municipality at Huancas, as well as various community members from Huancas. Our intention was to not only conduct a project for the purposes of, meeting objectives that I created, I guess, but also to ask or to really offer the community our expertise so that we're exploring interests that they might be wishing to learn more about, or using archaeology to promote something that they have in mind. And we were very lucky enough to get some great feedback. So this is a general map of like where we were able to dig and excavate, but and the yellow marks are archaeological excavation points, and then the blue is where we were able to do surface collection. 3 of these 4 sites that we excavated were ones that both were of interest to myself and as well to the community. But funny enough, they weren't interested in excavating in their own contemporary town. They didn't understand why I wanted to see it. They're like, that's not important. That's nothing archaeological. It's just streets. But I managed to kind of come to a great middle ground with them about it, and they allowed me to dig near the plaza, not the plaza, of course, but it was an important context for the purposes of the project because it was the most project de confianza tiempo colonial, like it was most confident colonial context we had. And then these sites here are actually sites with rock art and on cliff edges, so possible chulpas too. And to be quite honest, they're actually much earlier than what the purview of this project is trying to explore. But they were really important for the community to look at because they're hoping to develop a circuito turístico, a tour of the region, of the district. And they thought that these particular sites with the rock art would bring in a lot of tourism. So they wanted to get some archaeological work done there before bringing people to the site. So one of the first sites we dug at was Huanca Urco. It's actually open to the public, so if you ever go to Amazonas, Peru, Huancas, you can easily go to the site, and it would lead to really funny moments where we had French, German tourists just coming up being like, hey, what are you guys doing? But again, it was an interesting moment to kind of work at a tourist site. And it is a beautiful location, and I think that's one of the reasons why people go, is mostly to take the Instagram photos of the paisaje with the viewpoints. But when we start to kind of really get into where exactly Huanca Urco is located, we start to see the significance of the site. It looks onto Pueblo de los Muertos, so this cliff site with many, many chulpas and then tombs, cliff tombs, that you can see directly from it. You can see Gocta, one of the largest waterfalls in the region. And you can also see, you can overlook the Capacñang, so the Inca Road. What I'm trying to say is that it's a centrally located site with many vantage points. And it consists of 3, let's see here, 1, 2, and 3 rectangular structures. Rectangular structures were really an indication of Inca presence in the site, in the region, because prior to the Inca, a lot of the most typical construction type we see are circular structures. So this was already given us a clear indication of what's happening. But we were able to dig 2 units here in 2 of the rectangular structures, one of which, right here, is located on a mount, and it's located in the center part of the site. And I didn't expect to find what we found, but what we see here is underneath the rectangular structure, you see this curved wall here. So it's very clear evidence of Inca reoccupation in the region. And even here, I don't know if it really shows up with the resolution, but this is a capa de arcilla naranja, so like a floor made out of orange clay, kind of sealing the site. And then we went down 3 meters to find the base of the circular structure. And in that process, we were able to note different lenses of ash and deposits of various types of ceramic, some of which are fine, like very fine, nicely decorated ceramic. So my working theory is that it was potentially an intentional type of burial by the Inca of this site, and that the Inca themselves recognized the potencia that the site had, the fact that the site was centrally located was important. And again, this is a very typical Inca practice, but rather than build your own new site, why not just take over the site with already so much significant value to the local people, and then you kind of solidify your power and authority. The next site that we dug at was Ñuñurco, and this is a very curious site, and if anyone has suggestions at the end of it, I'm very happy to hear your interpretations of it too. But it includes a large circular structure measuring around 8 meters in diameter and a larger rectangular structure too. Based on the region, like the paisaje is, like the bedrock is really high, like it's really close to the surface, and it's very barren, like there's nothing around, it's just these two structures. And yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards this is not a residential site. The occupation and the deposits are really thin, and there wasn't a lot of material recovered from these two units that we dug. So I'm having the idea that this is likely constructed during the late Horizon period and maybe abandoned or not used heavily shortly after. The third site we dug at was at the Bioshundur, and this is one of the sites that out of the 3 sites or 4 sites that we dug at, this site had the least conservation of architecture, which made my job a little difficult because we kind of had to use the available skills we had and no LiDAR because it's right outside of the airport, so we can't fly a drone. And we had to kind of figure out where we could dig. And we were able to kind of put 2 units. One seems to be inside of a rectangular structure here, so possible cayanca. And then over here, we uncovered a bit of a circular structure. It wasn't until later that we kind of figured out that something was going on over here. And we also uncovered a looter's hole that's part of the structure here. And so the material that we found here is a mix between late Horizon and colonial, because it is one of the sites that we found glazed pottery, as well as animals that we see domesticated now, like cows and pigs and stuff. So I think it's fitting into this idea that the community has, that this site was likely the site that was occupied prior to the Huancas moving to where they are now in the Reducción. And I'm kind of leaning or thinking that this part here might be the original church. One of the oral histories that the people tell is that the church was actually physically moved from one of the sites at the Bioshundur possibly to the contemporary town of Huancas. And you see like colonial stone or carvings along the church. They say this actually wasn't here originally. We brought it over here. And I think that's also maybe one of the reasons why the looter hole is there, is because there's a belief that gold is buried in this site. And so, yeah. And finally, we dug at the Pueblo de Huancas. And this, again, it's very clearly showing us evidence of the reducción. The plaza, the iglesia is here, which makes me think that the plaza might have moved a little bit or something happened there. And we dug right across from the iglesia in this, what used to be the school that is now an abandoned lot that's run by the municipalidad. We were between, okay, well, we weren't. We thought briefly about digging around the church, and then I just knew that it would likely be a grave or a cemetery, and I didn't think it would be, very nice to have your great-great-grandparent dug up by archaeologists. So we decided to avoid that altogether, even though it is, again, one of probably the most confidential sites that we have that likely dates the colonial period, we just figured not touching it, like, is probably best. We did get to do some surface collection, which again was helpful. Oh, sorry. So yeah, that's right there, the church and the structure. Okay. So in terms of laboratory work, because I just got back, I'm still in the process of analyzing, but we were able to find a lot of different material ranging from animal remains to ceramic to lithics, and hopefully in the next few months we'll be able to kind of interpret that with more detail. We found primarily 4 different decoration types or styles in the site. This more locally recognized decoration style of applique, which people tend to associate as or label as the chachapoya style. This one here that kind of looks like a bit of cajamarca, which potentially is, I can't, at this point in time, I can't say if it is exactly cajamarca or imitation of cajamarca, but it's inspired for sure. And then Inca style decoration as well as the glazed pottery. We were able to conduct attribute analysis, and we adopted a model used by the TAP project, Lee Stedman's attribute analysis model. And we were able to look at every detail we could possibly think of, from firing to finishing, and then of course to paste, which is something that I'm really excited to look at because it reveals so much. But we were able to really consider the paste, which is the mixture of clay and temperate inclusions, and see how people, different potters, may have alternated the clay based on what the function of the pot may be, what personal preferences, or materials readily available, or connections to sites. In total, we were able to describe or identify 15 different taste types, but these were the big three that were kept popping up. So we usually focus more on inclusion, the size and shape of the inclusions, and then the cantidad, so the abundancy. We tend not to look at color because that is a lot of the times influenced by firing practices. So yeah, this is probably the type that is most closely similar to what we see today in huancas. So this like really coarse, large white inclusion, which is possibly caliza or limestone. Quartz, and then this one here, which is very similar, or it's likely kaolin. Again, it's a recipe that we see a lot in Cajamarca, but I can't determine yet if it's from Cajamarca. And then in terms of the distribution, very, very brief interpretations here, but what we're seeing is that this white caliza, closest to the huanca style, is it's consistently in all the different sites in the region and the different periods. Could that maybe indicate that, yes, this is a site or area inhabited by this community and they were producing pottery back then? I'm hoping that's, I don't know, I'll see what happens, but it is leaning towards that. And then we have quartz, and then in this particular column, it's really interesting because it's at the Pio Shundur site, that late horizon colonial site, and we see a huge increase of that kaolin paste. And a lot of the times, when it's kaolin paste, I'll run tests on this, but a lot of the times it's decorated like the Cajamarca style. So we're starting to see some some things relating there. So I likely won't be able to do this in this project, but I'm hoping that this is something we can explore in the future. In addition to the ceramic analysis we did of the archaeological materials, as well as the future petrographic thin sections we'll be able to look at as well. I'm kind of really excited by the idea of looking at heirloom pots. And these are pots that I described that are held or kept by community members of their great-great-grandfather made this pot and they keep it. It's something they still cherish today. And I think that, we have to be really sensitive about these pots because, of course, I can't go in and break it and then do the analysis I could possibly do. But maybe like an XRF or something could kind of lead us to getting some indication of the materials or chemicals or something to have an understanding of what pots from this particular time period. So what I'm trying to say is that I think this particular data set will help us fill in little gaps that we have. We have the archaeological, we have the historical, we have the contemporary, and then maybe this can kind of fill in the Republican, or yeah, the most recent history. So reflections, yes, let's get there. I threw a lot at you, but I'm hoping that we can maybe revisit or think about those questions I posed in the beginning. How have crafting communities adapted to shifting political regimes and colonization? What role does material and crafting play in maintaining community identity? And what is local production? How much time do I have? A couple minutes? Okay, so this is a minute. Let me play this clip for you here. It's one of the Huanquina potters from the Asociación La Cusana, and this is Señora Vilka Kulki, and I just think that it just illustrates a great point that I'm trying to make here.
De la misma silla se hace material esta se llama asiento callana. Callana. Pues bueno, no sé, casi me habla de quechua, una señorita hablaba de unas palabras, yo le dije, mamá, ¿por qué se dicen asiento callana? ¿Qué es la comienzan a hacer las ollas? ¿Qué son los materiales de haciendo callana, porque claramente dice boquita. No sé por eso, ¿verdad? Porque yo casi no he adaptado quechua.
¿Y su mamá hablaba poco de quechua?
No, sí hablaba, pues algunas palabras, digo, más no, porque nosotros ya aprendimos a hablar más correctamente en castellano. Antes, mis abuelitos ellos hablaban.
Los abuelos hablaban quechua, pero eran ya...
Entendían ellos mismos y sabían
Ajá.
qué quiere decir, cómo pronunciar y todo eso. Ya esto que voy a hacer se llama tangar.
Cambiar.
Tangar es para influencia.
Tanguear.
Esto se llama tangana.
Tangana.
So, sorry, I didn't realize it would jump. But in that clip, we see there that Señora, or just briefly, Señora Vilka Kulki mentions that her grandparents spoke Quechua, but she doesn't speak Quechua, and that she doesn't know like how to speak Quechua, but she remembers them speaking it. And what's funny enough, though, is that shortly after she explains that, she learned how to speak correctly in Castellano, and that's why she doesn't speak Quechua. After she mentions that, she says, oh yeah, and this is tanguear. And that's actually a Quechua term. And so I think what it illustrates is that a lot of the terminology used for the technical practices in Huancas are not terms in Spanish, but rather in Quechua. Again, if we look at that idea of the local and non-local, and specifically with surrounding the language of Quechua and potting tradition in Amazonas and Huancas, Quechua isn't spoken prior to the Inca presence in the region. A different language was spoken in the region. So one illustrates that pottery production, in this case, is preserving certain elements of their identity, of their culture, of their history in the technical act. And then two, it's also illustrating that these people, again, were not from here, but yet they're very much from here. Like they're so innately connected with the landscape. They know the landscape, they know the paisaje really well, but they're again, they have that history, like evidence, like little residues, or I don't know, illustrating that there's something else is happening here. And I think just to kind of close it up, because I know I'm out of time, but the curious thing, I guess, I'm hoping to, or I'm really noticing, and I'm hoping to eventually present this in a way that really is clear, is that, when asking about how potters and crafting were adapted under colonial and different political regimes, we kind of noticed that it wasn't as though everything, again, was maintained, nothing changed. Rather, little things were changing. Little things like adaptations were happening. That's depending on whether they were under, I don't know, they had a new population to consider in terms of the forms that they want to produce. So in the Spanish period, we start seeing different types of forms, so candelabras, like candle holders that weren't typical prior. So it shows that there's a new influence and they adapted, they incorporated, they've produced for that population. Again, we're seeing that in the present as well because we have tourists coming in and they can't bring, if you're flying to Amazonas, you can't bring a large cooking pot with you on the plane. So the tourists are requesting miniatures, like little souvenir sizes. And Huanca potters are like, no problem, we can do that, we'll adapt. But yet, I think that we need to complicate the idea that them adapting and them taking advantage of the situation is a loss or it's a possible risk to culture. It's rather illustrating that people have agency and they can they can mold them, they can take advantage of the situation. And in this case here, for example, we see Señora Elvira painting with this red paint that typically came from Colcomar, a different site in the region, not in Huancas, but most recently they lost they lost contact with the property owner of where they were retrieving their red paint. And so they've had to actually look for red paint while it was there in Huancas. And they were able to find it. Like they know the landscape so well that they were able to see it like something that could work, and it did work. So it's an adaptation. It's response to a situation, and it's creative, it's innovative. Again, Señora Buena here is actually playing around with the paste recipe a bit. Even though she does have the traditional limestone practices that she typically uses, she wanted to try creating a more finer paste. So she removed the caliza, the limestone, and only is now playing around with sand. Again, another adaptation. And then here, Señora Katia is one of the only potters I saw that was painting with really vivid colors, very outside of the norm for Huancas. But again, when I asked her about it, she said, well, I'm an artisan, I'm an artist. It's my creative expression. I want to do this. And I think that kind of drives home the point that, this is fluid. Changes are happening, sometimes they're subtle and sometimes they're continuous, but it's all people's decisions and adaptation, and it's not necessarily this very negative story we tend to have when it comes to contact and period, or the idea that tourism is going to risk people's livelihoods or culture. So yeah, thank you.
Any questions? Maybe one question?
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely to see what you're working on. Years ago, I worked in the Huancas area.
I know.
And there are several people that worked on ceramics there, and I've been to Huancas ceramicists and made photos, and some of your pots look identical to what we see in the markets there.
I'm very excited that you say that.
I don't know if you've read Melissa Hagstrom's dissertation, but it's all on the potters, the current potters there.
Yes.
The potters in the 80s.
Yes, I couldn't bring it in too much here because I was limited on time. But a dream of mine is to really maybe even go back or
they're still
go to
potting,
Huancas.
because I was just there last summer and there were still pots
Yeah.
being sold in the market.
Yeah, I think it would be an amazing comparison to look at what contemporary Huanca or potters and Huancas of Mantaro are doing, and then seeing the similarities, and maybe even getting access to the archaeological material too to see what.
Well, talk to me about it. We've
yes.
got like 200 boxes of ceramics.
Okay, I'll be a postdoc soon. Thank you.